a note up. Let's see.
What are we looking for?
Oh, I'm just posting. Remember, I mentioned Discord last week, on Thursday when we spoke. I did not get anything up, but I'm going to mention it right now while we're at it. Let's see. I haven't done a whole lot over the last week. I've been using Recall just sort of in my daily use and finding it useful and interesting. I'm finding a couple of issues which I haven't kicked back to them yet on it being able to get the text out of some online PDF files. I'm getting some errors out of those. But I just download them anyway and pass them into my uh, other AI chatbots. Um, and I'm not as driven as you are as of yet, but it does get a reasonable amount of use on a daily basis.
Hmm. I'm, I'm getting more comfortable with it testing me and telling me that my memory is terrible. Um,
Yeah,
which, initially was, I think back to the when I 10, 15 years ago when I started creating videos, and the first few videos were actually worse than a root canal. Um,
for you or the rest of us.
that could have been both, because I mean, I was so worried about getting it right that I'd spend an hour writing a 10-minute script.
Yep.
Um, and then I was so stupid I'd actually read the script, which made it even worse. Um, so yeah. So and as you use it, you ask questions that didn't come to mind initially, which was, well, since it's doing what they call it, space repetition,
Hmm.
once you get a dozen pieces of content in there with questions on it, you end up spending all of your time answering questions as opposed to doing something else because it's recycling all of the content. But you can go in and tell it, you can turn off questions or you can turn off all of the questions for a particular piece of content and just delete it, which I'm about to do with a couple of pieces of stuff. And then you also, it seems that you get to a point where you've watched 7 or 8 videos on the same topic and the questions are getting terribly, terribly redundant. So I'm not interested in generating any more questions on this particular topic. And after a while, you probably get rid of 2 or 3 of the sets of questions and simply leave one set in there that
Yeah.
will come back periodically. So I still don't know what to do with the graph. It seems like
Oh,
a lot of eye candy, because the search is so good in the taxonomy.
yeah.
The biggest problem is me figuring out where I really ought to put stuff. And it's nice that you can put things in multiple places at the same
Right.
time, though it still appears that when you go to look for it, you think about it differently than you did when you filed it someplace. So,
Right.
so
Yep.
you go, So it's not where you think it should be. So you have to go ahead and use the search, and the search is really good. I
So,
haven't I haven't
so,
got a
so
sense of what actually it's searching when you do use the search, but I'll dig into that a little bit more sometime.
so the graph in the PKM community I'm involved with, uh, the one of the concepts of the graph, and it's again it's driven somewhat by Obsidian, is that it does provide some concept of clustering of ideas that you're collecting.
Mhm.
And that's one of the major uses that they're suggesting you make of the graph
I
is
see
to
some of the nodes are getting bigger
right,
on the
exactly.
graph.
And also then you can take a look at the kinds of things they're connected to determine whether or not the connection itself is of interest and important.
So I'm still mentally unsettled about the fact that there's no connection between the taxonomy and the graph.
Mhm.
The pieces that you put in it, the basic underlying metaphor is a card,
Right. Mhm.
and all of the things on the graph are cards. All of the things in the taxonomy are cards, but the taxonomy itself are simply tags, and the
Right.
tags are not in the graph,
And you can't,
which
yeah, I haven't actually, I have to go back and take a look about whether or not you can start do filtering with the tags.
not in the graph. Well, there's no way to filter in the graph except clicking on things. Um, so, or is there?
Yeah.
That
That's,
statement may not be correct. Uh,
I have a pretty disjoint graph at this point. Got like 15 things in it, and they're in separate parts of the screen. Yeah, I don't see
Card
anything
is
right.
not visible. Okay, so if I go in the graph and I click on austerity, and then I click on capital order, and I click on, then I click on bricks. Okay, the uh, I don't know. I'm gonna have to go mess around with this because my mind just disconnected for some reason. Oh, that's it. Oh, really? As you select, if you're looking at the graph
Right.
and you click on something in the taxonomy,
Hmm.
it's actually an or relationship. So that if it's this or this or this, it
Right. So
shows
yeah,
up.
everything you click on, it does filter those items and put them in the graph. Exactly. Hmm.
Well, it filters them but it's an or relationship as opposed to an and relationship, which makes sense because I think it makes sense
Well,
because
isn't it filtering out everything else essentially?
yes,
What am I looking at here? So if I kill this, if I click that one, it brings up just that thing. So if you have all of them off, it essentially shows everything that is in your taxonomy.
correct.
And then if you as you start clicking on things, it picks the first one and then adds to it as you go.
Right.
Have no cards that match that topic. That topic comes in, I can kill that one.
Mm.
Guys are
Yeah, I gotta spend some time with this. This is
okay. There's some
the
stuff
the
that
people who designed it know exactly how it's supposed to work.
well, I I keep getting the emails from those guys, and it's pretty obvious that they know how they think they want it to work, but not necessarily how everyone wants it to work,
Yeah,
right? So it's not visible due to.
the thing is,
Hmm,
really, there are there are, and if you look at the graph, there are tons of cards that you did not create
right. Mm-hmm.
because of they've already been created by somebody. So
Right.
when you add the content, it goes through your content and identifies things that have already been created and it links you to them.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I don't know, I had a thought, but I think I lost part of it.
Well, that's sort of like their intelligent browsing or whatever they're calling it.
Yes, yeah. And I,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't remember exactly what the name of it was. But so that when you're looking at something that's not in recall,
Yes.
if it has text in it that is in your recall, it highlights it so that you can mouse over it and see what is in your recall. What is it doing?
So yeah, is this interesting or not? So there's the oh, there it is. Okay. I was I'm so how do you get information out of the graph? Thought I saw something there. Pop card opened up.
You click on it and it opens a card.
Doesn't I can't prove that by doing it.
Hmm.
Although I something did pop up for a minute. I wonder whether it's me, not maybe let's take a look and see if okay, that's probably me. Let's see, what else are they trying to figure out? Secure token, identity toolkits. Looking at my blockers, see what's stopping it from working. Okay, didn't get it yet. Let's see. Tag manager, trusted, trusted. Let's try turning that one on. See what happens. Still didn't help. Okay. If I blow things up, I can at least see what the name of the card is. Still not getting a. What else do you want from me? Stripe. You guys need Stripe Tour. Okay, I got more playing to do also.
Well, somebody's here. Well, hello,
Hey,
Randall.
hi. Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. Have you been here before?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh,
It's been a while.
my, I, I can't remember what I had for breakfast.
Yeah. I hear you.
Bruce and I were just talking about our experiences over the last week with recall.
Uh,
Is that something that you've looked at all, or?
not yet. It's kind of crossed my radar screen. Um, lately I've been digging into um, how do I guess probably the best word is, some orchestration technologies. So these are tools and techniques for coordinating a group of agents, or a group of agents is not the right word, a group of models, generative
Okay.
models, to, with the idea that um, the the grouping is able to manage a wider variety of capabilities, like um, going out and searching the web, and returning some information and then processing that, or uh, doing, performing some function on a computer, on an outside computer. So basically, kind of linking a model result with the outside world, which is kind of a funny way to put it because it's all done in the computer.
So, what are you using to do this?
Well, right now, I'm just, starting to investigate it, so I'm not
Hmm.
doing it just yet.
Oh, okay.
But there are a couple of tools that I'm learning about. So one is called MCP, Model Context Protocol,
Okay.
and it's basically an API protocol developed by Anthropic, um, to kind of coordinate a variety of models um, through API calls. So it gets a little technical. The other
Okay.
one, got to make sure I get this right. Uh, N8N. This seems to be getting a little bit of uh, traction. It's more of an automation tool, but it does have some capabilities for uh, helping to coordinate the results of a variety of LLM based product processes. Um,
Okay.
so it's sort of like you can define a logic, and it's code free. So it's like, and again, I'm just starting to learn about it. Um, and it's also like a free download, but you need, I think it's JS Node uh, to work it. Um, so so anyway, those are starting to be interesting to me, and because I've been playing around with a variety of models using Olama, um, and it seems that it's possible to get a couple different models talking to each other. Um,
Okay.
and the idea of artificial intelligent agents um, is basically kind of running these processes in loops, where each loop sort of maybe generates a plan and then a set of actions and then feeds back on itself. So
So,
you get
have
these loops
you
going together, and then they're kind of doing different things and coordinating their actions.
so have you looked at any of the things because they've run out of data?
Mhm.
They're they're putting together an AI and not telling it anything
Mm-hmm.
and letting it create its own understanding based on creating problems and solving them.
Right. Yeah. So there's this, there's unsupervised learning, um, and there's another term. Maybe it'll come to me, where basically you're the the process is learning structure from unstructured data or unlabeled data. So supervised learning is where you have data that's labeled, and it it learns to classify new data appropriately and label it appropriately.
Mm.
Unsupervised learning, and I'm probably mangling it, is where you're kind of giving it no labels, and it's clustering, and possibly labeling things for you. So it's these are different machine learning techniques.
And then if it's doing this on its own, how does it figure out if it's valid?
Well, so this is what they call an alignment process. So in the human world, everybody has can have different words for things, right?
Right.
um and those different, it's the words that are different. We might be seeing the same patterns, but just using different labels for them, right? So the alignment process is kind of, I think maybe one way to look at that is sort of aligning the labelings to the norms of a human population, right?
That's actually really interesting. Um, I'm in general in discussions with the systems engineering community
Yes.
about how to communicate across the various disciplines that are involved in engineering projects.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that might be useful to cross-reference the discipline terminology so that people can translate.
Yeah. Well, that's real interesting. I'm doing very much a similar thing across disciplines. So also working with systems engineers and system sciences to look at other disciplines, say biology,
Right.
and translate between biological concepts and engineering concepts.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, same sort of thing. And it's not always entirely like relabeling one for one, because different concepts in different fields they're actually seeing different patterns, right? So there isn't always, it's the same thing going across languages. There are words or terms in one language that don't translate well to another. So finding those anomalies, if you will, or nuances can be quite informative as to why, say, for instance, conflicts are happening, or looking for explanations. I think, like, why is there a word for this? Why are there so many words for snow in you know uh, Inuit populations and not so many in Italian populations? Well, it's they don't have that experience, and if you transplant a person from one of those areas to the other, they're going to naively come up with a whole different way of expressing themselves, that the locals will kind of think is, yeah, that doesn't make sense, because these are norm violations, and a lot of these kind of labelings emerge as sort of normative phenomena.
But normative that has been shaped by the environments also.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we're very much a product of the vats we steep in.
Yeah. Mhm. Interesting. Um, is there any place that I can go to take a look in more detail at what you're doing with this?
Um, hmm. The linguistic stuff, trying to think. Actually, there's a there is a book, an author who talks about normativity aspects. Um, and let's see if I can put my hand on it real quick. Ah, all right, I can find the author. Normative species. I'm pretty sure that's the title. A guy named Yaroslav Peregrin, Peregrin. And he talks about or the human capability to create, maintain, and follow rules.
Uh-huh.
And kind of like the idea that one of our superpowers, if you will, is kind of just normalizing things, in our minds. And I think this is one of the things that our brains do. We, in a sense, so so I think a lot of this is kind of backed up by like neurological research and stuff like that. There's another thread of research in artificial intelligence called active inference, and the brilliant mind behind that is a guy named Carl Friston. Um, it's it's seen as an alternative to reinforcement learning, but I'm not sure there's so much about like the normative aspects. It's more like one of the driving forces in what they're actually claiming all biological behavior is uh, avoiding surprise, right? Um, and they're kind of using that concept to develop some new approaches to AI. And Friston is a neuroscientist. Um, so yeah, I think there is a sort of fairly significant body of work there. I haven't really kind of stitched it all together yet, but I find it's a quite useful perspective.
I'll try to cross-reference into some of that.
Yeah.
Fighting with modeling right now, so I'm not sure of exactly where that.
Yeah. Well, I think if you look at how these LLMs are created, a lot of it uses reinforcement learning, and um, so so that they're creates rewards, and so in a sense, it's maybe it's you could look at it as as some of this modeling activity as searching for normalizable data, normalizing patterns.
Yeah, not what I see in the systems engineering modeling community.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
MBS is the word, and the vendors are the leads.
yeah. Well, systems engineering is a lot about innovation, and it's actually the opposite of normalization.
Well, yeah, that's one piece of it. I am trying to spearhead the recognition that systems engineering at the moment, which is driven by a group called INCOSE.
Yeah, I'm actually a member.
Oh, you are also. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I think that INCOSE is essentially attempting to own everything that has the word system in front of it.
Yeah.
And I am involved in discussions both on the systems engineering professionals channel on Discord and LinkedIn, trying to drive the idea that you have to be able to separate out the activities and deliverables of system science, the slew of applied system sciences, and systems engineering.
Yeah.
To be able to describe what needs to happen in a product universe,
Mm-hmm.
because that's essentially where we live as people, is
Mm-hmm.
doing something with it. But the intents are much different at those three levels within the hierarchy of application of systems. And I think we need to recognize what the intents and the deliverables are of the science aspect, the applied science aspect, and the engineering aspect.
Mm.
And to get people to recognize that systems engineers can do system science, but when they're doing system science, they're not doing systems engineering.
Right.
But systems engineering is a reductive activity, and system science is an investigative activity, which
Mm-hmm.
is much more
I
driven.
think Bruce, I think about it as one promotes understanding and the other one promotes stuff.
Mm-hmm.
System engineering actually creates stuff.
Right. Well,
Okay.
again, engineering by itself basically says application of technology and mechanisms to solve problems. Science doesn't solve problems. Science understands things, right?
Yeah.
And applied science figures out how to take that understanding and use it for something, but not industrial. That's the engineering part.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So, it doesn't escape me that there's definitely a philosophy of science thing going on here.
yeah,
And it's kind of interesting. I've been in conversations with people, particularly in the active inference community, that kind of make the claim that we don't need science. It's because it's all active inference.
uh-huh.
Um, and there's a book by Friston, I think it was Friston, called The Pragmatic Turn. Um, I haven't totally read it, but I think it's kind of about this idea of just sort of hyper pragmatism being the word of the day.
Mm-hmm.
There's another, I think, thread in the philosophy of science. I think that it's termed post-normal science, which starts to examine complexity and look at some of the reasons why, I'll say, just to maybe oversimplify things, generic science has such challenges communicating, because a lot of times scientists, when they're doing public communication, they're just mincing and dicing their words, and most people just it shuts them off. So this idea of post normal science sort of focuses on sensitivities, like looking at a system and examining what is it sensitive to, and communicating about that. It makes it a little easier to for non-scientists to grasp, I think. And I think this is one of the reasons why like all this uproar about climate science, people just shut it down because they don't understand it. It's and they it's and they don't understand it because it's being presented badly in a way that they just can't grasp. So it's more of a reflex action at the public level than it's not that the science is wrong, it's that the communication is being rejected because there's not a capacity to absorb it.
I don't know what to
on
do
the
with it.
receiving end. Yeah, on the receiving end. So anyway, that's I think there's this little germ of an idea in what they call post-normal science. This is like 10, 20 years ago, that they were trying to focus on a different way of communicating, and hence a little bit different way of doing science. And also related to that, it's it can be helpful to to use that sort of a lens.
Bruce loses his internet from time to time, so that's.
Oh, okay, yeah, I didn't notice he disappeared.
That's not the first time.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, I think this whole theme of complexity, this whole theme of complexity in COSI has popped up in the last couple of years. I do think there's a little bit of a struggle going on. With that, I'm involved with the two working groups, natural systems and social systems, which I suspect are a little bit at the. I'm not going to claim that I bear any responsibility, but it's like, I'm kind of in these conversations, and then the ripples I see seem to come back. So it is kind of an interesting little world. And so incidentally, with the natural systems working group, or there's a little nexus with the International Society for System Sciences, which I'm also a member of. So there's a little bit of tension going on there, which I'm very sensitive to, because INCOSE terminated their MOU with ISSS. And I've been working with the guy who is current president of the ISSS, and we're doing working on the CBOC section, which he is responsible for, which is kind of like the basis of, which covers system sciences and so on. If you're interested in contributing, I can see if we can get you looped in.
Randall, why did they terminate that?
Well, I couldn't. I don't really have an authoritative information. It's only anecdotal. They, like maybe a year or two ago, they brought in a new executive director, paid executive director.
Records, yeah.
And
for ISSS?
No, in COSI.
Oh, okay.
And so he's kind of been cleaning house and reshuffling the decks and so on.
And he is not a systems engineer.
No, he's more of a, well, he's an executive director. And oh, by the way, I've been through this rodeo before with another professional organization. In some ways, bringing in a paid executive director was very helpful, but it definitely changed the organization.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, I, 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 I get where you're coming from there. Um,
Hmm.
and it's an interesting situation, I think. There's, on one hand, well, it's a little bit like there's an old guard and a new guard.
Yeah.
Um, and there's also an old guard
Yeah. Right.
and a new guard.
Mhm.
So, it, this is also, if you think about it, there's a normalization process going on,
Sure.
right? And the medium for doing that, I think, is CBOC in the handbook.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, at least that's kind of what I'm starting to grasp.
So, normalization for the systems disciplines or normalization for systems engineering?
Well, certainly for the INCOSE community,
Okay.
and it's a question. I mean, there's a trade-off, I think, between like diversity and homogeneity, right? If they really want to be the reference point for systems engineering, the question is, how diverse do they have to be, right?
Right.
And that's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Right.
because
Yeah.
if they want to be diverse, they'll be diverse. If they don't want to be diverse, they'll, and the less diverse they are, the less attraction they will hold. But that doesn't necessarily translate into power. Power is meaning membership, right? So
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
complex
I'm not
situation.
sure exactly how those dynamics raise out. The Discord community
Yep.
is a mix of probably I don't know, 60-40
Yeah.
non-INCOSE versus INCOSE members.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably 70-30 Europe and worldwide versus US.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a much different perspective on the field, and appears to be a much more open community to thinking about, or to at least recognizing that the other systems disciplines exist. They're struggling with figuring out what to do with them, but
Yeah.
they don't, they have, so I'd say substantially more uh, um, education and or at least knowledge
Mm-hmm.
of some of the history of systems thinking.
Yeah. So what Discord group is this?
It's called Systems Engineering Professionals. I can get you a link if you want it.
Okay. Well, I think the thing is there, I'm not actually a systems engineer.
Doesn't make any difference. There are lots of
Yeah.
people up here.
Yeah. But I do have, I've been working with the natural systems group for more than a decade now.
Yep.
And the social systems, I helped uh, grow that group. And I also, the social systems group, I was asked to help um, stand that up. It's still pretty struggling. Uh, Engineers don't want to deal with social
Right.
things.
Yeah. And,
You don't
well,
want to deal with anything that thinks.
That's, well, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and
Deal with hybrid systems. I mean, really.
mhm.
They're trying to tell you that everything is engineering and everything is engineered and social engineering and yeah, I think they're spinning down the wrong tub.
Well, this is an emergent property of I think just kind of human social, going back to social
Yeah.
systems.
Mm-hmm.
We do tend to cluster into, you know, into groups, right? Um, I think of it more as like, um, oh, there's a word. I I got to write something on this. Circles, right? It's more like ecological circles, um, patches. So depending on how you look at, a population, it's going to kind of evolve into, a variety of clusters, some group of clusters. And that's a product of, at the kind of at the lowest level, um, recombination of more atomic units. So there's construction and construction and degeneracy going on all at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
I just I find it surprising myself that people who suggest that they're systems engineers and they should be thinking holistically
Mm,
can't expand their scope outside of essentially exactly what they're doing
yeah.
and attempting to subvert everything else that exists into that scope.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that's sort of driving me crazy. You know, I think I'm a systems engineer.
Hmm.
I have no problem recognizing what my limitations are within
Yeah.
that scope.
Yeah.
I don't leave myself alone in that scope. I'm you hear me thinking about other ways of thinking about the
Hmm.
broader problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
But I
So
solve problems and deliver solutions as a systems engineer. I think
yeah.
about the problem in a little bit broader way.
Yes.
I
Right.
don't know why they don't.
Yeah.
And
Well, it's so I think it, were you at IW this year?
no, I have not been a big IW guy. I've
Yeah.
done a lot of the bunch of the ISs. I retired a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
so I'm not physically involved. I don't have a
Yeah.
company financing that anymore.
Yeah. No,
Uh,
yeah, I get that. Um, anyway, I was part of a session where we were talking about social systems and human systems interfaces. Um, anyway, long story short, one of the comments from the group was to the effect that systems engineers don't want to get involved in governance. This was kind of talking about AI, right? We do not engineer governance, right? That's a stance.
yeah,
I think it's a wise stance. So I think there is a really important question to be asked as to, you know, what are the ethics of systems engineering?
right.
And this actually is a philosophical question. And if you're not prone to talking about a philosophical question, it doesn't register. I mean, there's no sensitivity there, right? So you can talk all you want, and it's just going to fall on deaf ears, right? I was in a um, there was a session. There's this like the systems thinking roundtable. We were talking about STEM,
Mhm.
as an educational paradigm, and I I mentioned that this is a philosophy. STEM is a philosophy, and there's a reason why systems engineers in the United States have such a problem with philosophy because we don't get it in school. The Europeans do. So I think that's a really interesting distinction between, say, systems engineering in Europe and systems engineering, particularly the UK, where I think it kind of started, um, and the US. So there are tensions there for sure.
Yeah. Hmm. right.
But in my mind, it's not just language. It's, there's this linkage between the language you have and the things you can see, right?
Yeah,
That comes out of anthropology.
sure.
So, if without that sort of multidisciplinary perspective, and this is one of the things I've been really pushing on, is transdisciplinarity,
Hmm.
right? So, and I think there is some, I've seen some acceptance of that, but a lot of times it's more like transdisciplinary means they come to our meetings.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes we let them speak.
Yes, right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily change what we do,
Yeah.
but hey,
I
they're
don't get
there.
that. Yeah. Yes. The environment that I worked in, was so much different than that. I was in a commercial company that, learned systems engineering. I worked for a couple of Nkosi presidents. I worked for Ginny Lentz and Pat Hale.
Mm,
Uh, so I was involved in the beginning, although I was not involved in Nkosi at the point that I started to become a systems engineer. Uh, and the idea that you didn't bring in all of the teams, because there was a lot of, integrated teaming back in the
mhm,
90s, is so different than what I get the feel from
mhm.
Nkosi.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. No, I think it definitely has changed. I mean, when I came in like 2014,
mhm,
um,
yeah,
it was, I mean, with Natural Systems Group, we're definitely an outlier,
right.
and
Mhm.
I could see that, and it's like there are other systems engineers doing their stuff, and here's us doing our stuff,
Well,
and
again, a lot of that just goes back to what engineering is. You
yeah,
mentioned, uh, the natural systems group being in engineering seems a little strange
yes.
because you can impact natural systems, but you can't engineer them,
Well,
right?
that's
The idea of
that's where I might contest a little bit.
engineering the social structure, by definition of the word, at least for me, doesn't match.
Hmm.
You can design it, you can impact it, but you can't engineer it, right? You can bring engineered mechanisms and technologies to help solve the problem, but it's a hybrid system at that point.
Yeah, well, it depends on it goes back to this language thing.
Right. Yeah, I
Yeah,
absolutely agree. But
right.
again, look it up online.
Hmm.
Look it up in books.
Yeah,
And engineering has a meaning.
yeah, right. But I mean, there are threads of engineering, and I think this is one of the that goes back to like the normalizing
Mhm.
aspect. Um, I think at this, if you 20 years ago, the situation was a little bit different than it is now. I think that there are more engineers thinking about complexity and using complex systems concepts in their work, similarly to natural systems. Um, it's really, I think, a question of can you see it, and part of that relates to what are the books you've read. So if you
Mm.
look across the literature, and this is where I think LLMs, for instance, are really actually really fascinating tools because you can do this. You can compare, say, different stances on engineering across engineering textbooks, and some of them are more conducive to looking at natural systems. Some of them are much less. So it depends on the school you go to. It depends on the vat you steep in, right? Now, is that an engineering question? Is that something engineers should get wrapped up in? I think that that's a fair question for disciplinary, um, like pedagogy, right? How much do you want these kids to learn about complexity. Um, and and a higher level question is, how are you going to live with that?
Yeah.
Right? We've never asked these questions before because we've never had these problems before. But these, I think, are questions we need to be asking now.
Well, and some
And
questions,
maybe it means the engineering disciplines change a little bit. But you know,
yeah,
is that above my pay grade? I don't get paid, so I don't care.
right,
This
yeah,
is just really fascinating to me.
yeah, and well, again, it's another place that systems engineering at this point, or in Cozy, seems to think that to be a systems engineer, you need to be able to do everything that any systems engineer does.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and part of that is, I think, relates to the success of systems engineering and what the customers are looking for. They're looking for, cost, quality, delivery, and on a product. And systems engineering can be pretty good at that. What they don't do, which is outside of their scope, is look at the performance of those products out in the real world and what happens with them and what happens to the reputations of their companies and also the political ecosystems that emerge out of the powers that are created, capabilities, competencies,
yeah,
right?
I agree with you. I've written about that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So it depends on really, what do you look at, what do you consider as a system? How do you draw that line around or the boundary around your attention,
So,
right?
so Randall, are you saying there are some important things that we choose not to know?
Oh
You
yeah,
know, you
definitely.
talk about not going out and finding out how the product functions in the real world, which I would think would be an extremely important thing to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Though,
at a certain level, right? I mean, we pay attention to certain things, and there's trade-offs involved in that. So it's
mm,
like you create an automobile, you create a product line that creates this thing, the machine that creates the machine, um, and all of that is within a context. It's an economic context with some underlying substrate. Like, oh, we've got all this oil, right? We can get it out of the ground, and then we can do this with it. I mean, there's a whole causal chain of stuff that goes on in the production of these artifacts.
and sometimes we build an Edsel.
Yes, yeah. Well, we've built. I mean, we spent the last 70, 100 years, building what we've got today, and it's hard to get off of that
Yeah.
off of that
Well,
train. Um, so, engineering as a discipline. Um, I mean, you look at the problematics that they expose themselves to, and it's very selective.
mhm.
And so I think there's a meta level question. I think that asks, can we really live with this? And that devolves to, how do we teach our kids? What do we teach our kids? What do we ask them to do? What do we ask? And this is sort of the policy level stuff. What are the policies we create that support that activity? It's worked for us so far, but it's getting a little untenable, I think. And
I don't know. I remember reading Limits to Growth
yeah,
in 69, 70-ish.
yeah.
I was 14 maybe. And it took another 30 years until actually realized who those who the meadows were and
Mm-hmm.
where they worked, et cetera, et cetera. Uh, but that time frame does not seem to have materialized in a useful way based on what has been passed along to children,
Yeah.
generally
Yeah.
our children, right?
Yeah. Well, historically, and I've dug into this a little bit. I realize we're maybe a little over time here, but um, long story short, there was a period in U.S. history where, and it may have gone beyond that, but I think in the history of systems thinking and system sciences, where there was a divergence, and I think there was I won't say intentional, but a concerted move to focus on uh, stop focusing on like the biological aspects of systems and focus on the engineering aspects. So so yeah, and that fed into the developments in the last 70, 80 years in cybernetics and engineering, and sort of the division of cybernetics from systems. And so coincidentally, um, I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in, I started in like 1980, 82, 83. That was 7 years after the closing of, I think it was a biological systems laboratory or something like that, which was headed by Heinz Forrester, who was like one of the luminaries um, in cybernetics. That came out of a political decision. And I don't remember exactly the context, but how it ended up was a lot of that work went to MIT.
Okay.
And since then, oh my God, they've been just on such a roll with like military hardware and stuff like that, right? So it's sort of the application of this thinking went into like the development of the military industrial complex. So anyway, when I was there, I started digging, just totally unbeknownst to me. I started digging into some of the concepts, and it wasn't until like literally 5 years ago that I learned about the existence of that laboratory and Heinz Forster's work in cybernetics. And I said, oh my God, if I had known about this 40 years ago, it would have changed my whole. I mean, this was the work I was doing. And it just would have been enriched it, had that still been there and had I even known about that body of work, it would have like answered so many questions and just shortened a lot of my other gyrations I've done through my career. Anyway, it was just sort of this interesting nexus. And there's also sort of this, a lot of these are sort of reflected in institutional tensions, say MIT versus Berkeley or Stanford. So I think it goes to like the different threads of research and clusters of researchers and so on, where these tensions play out. And now we can start to understand some of that using these methodologies of measuring language. So and the question I think for engineers is, if we can do that, does it make sense to engineer social systems? I think the question really is not that we're not affecting social systems. The question is, from an engineering perspective, are we doing it well or are we doing it badly? I think we're doing it badly. And it's a choice as to whether you want to do it better or let it devolve.
And at the same time, Randall, don't we have to ask, do social systems want to be engineered? Will they reject the engineering?
Well, that's a political economy question. And I think it does have a question, it does bear on what engineering means. And I think you can, it's also a question of what does science mean, right? If you look at the history of science, science actually came out of religion. It was sort of a reaction in some ways to, to religious dogma, but also it eventually became accepted. I mean, Newton kind of worked with the church, right? And it sort of almost became not necessarily a branch of the church. They wanted to be, I think, perceived as independent, but there was definitely a symbiosis going on there, and it still is there. Right? So I think the arguments about religion and science this is all kind of like goes back to the philosophy of science and the wider philosophy of philosophy, right? So these are sort of meta questions that we're still struggling with.
Well, if you're gonna engineer a solution, it would seem to make sense that you would also attempt to understand whether or not that solution is functional in the context that you want it to address.
Well, and you do have to look at what that context is. If you look at, I mean,
I would contend that systems thinking has failed because it was evolved without an awareness of the context that it wanted to support. And for the last 90 years since Bertalanffy, the world has, for the most part, rejected systems thinking because of systems thinkers.
Yeah. Well, it had a job to do, and I think it still has a job to do. And I think if you zoom out to what's the relationality of that job, well, the job happens in a context, and that's a context of power, right? And projecting power and using power. I mean, literally, like, say, fossil fuel energy. And there, so there's economic things going on. This is looking at the things at a social level.
Well, there are things to be addressed.
Yeah.
Okay? And for the most part, the tools that we have developed to address them have been relatively insufficient.
Yeah.
Though in a typical fashion, if the hammer's not working, we just pound harder.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
Okay? Because we're not going to say that we're using the wrong tool. I mean, God forbid that we were that stupid. But so I hate to end this, but we're well overdue, and I got to go. And
yeah, no, those are really great points. And
I dropped my contact information in the chat if you want to grab it. I am interested in the ISSS stuff.
Okay.
So if you have a contact or a suggestion as to how to think about being involved a little bit more and definitely about understanding a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a conference coming up, and yeah, I'll pop you an email.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
There will be a meeting this Thursday and next Thursday, but not next Tuesday. I have a doctor's appointment. Okay. Been delightful. Thank you very much.
Likewise. Thank you.
Take care, Randall.
You too.
Bruce.